A lone rider breaks the horizon line on the Central Asian steppe, one small silhouette where the sky seems to swallow the earth. The men waiting in the dust assume it's another messenger, another soldier, another errand from a Khan. But as the figure draws closer, the camp's confidence shifts into confusion, then disbelief. Because the rider is not a man, she's a woman. And not merely a woman, she's a princess. Now ask yourself, in an empire built on conquest where marriages are treaties and daughters are bargaining chips, what kind of princess rides into a warrior camp as if she owns the ground beneath their boots? Here's the part no one sees yet. This princess isn't arriving to be chosen. She's arriving to choose. Her name is Khutulun, a name that would travel farther than most armies. By the time her story reaches its final chapter, she will be credited with leading men by the tens of thousands, shaping succession politics, and becoming so famous that echoes of her legend will survive into stories told centuries later. But we begin earlier, back when the Mongol world was still wide open, still hungry, still splintering into rival powers that all claimed they were the true heirs of Genghis Khan. The year is 1260. The Mongol Empire, once united, stretches across a staggering sweep of the globe, steppe to sea, desert to forest, touching the edges of Europe and the long frontiers of China. It is the greatest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. And like many empires that grow too large too fast, it is beginning to crack along the lines that always crack first: ambition, succession, and pride. In that world, a girl is born into the highest bloodline, what the Mongols called the Golden Family. Her father is Kaidu Khan, a powerful descendant of Genghis Khan, a rival force in a chessboard of Khans. In another life, that girl's future would be a single sentence: she will marry for politics. But history has a habit of changing when one person refuses to accept the sentence written for them. Khutulun's name is often translated as something like bright moon. It sounds gentle until you realize gentleness was never the assignment. She grows up surrounded by brothers, 14 of them, princes raised with the expectation that power would eventually pass from father to son, as it had for generations. And yet Kaidu is not the kind of father who treats a daughter as decorative property. Whether it was pride, instinct, or something harder, survival, he allows Khutulun into the same training that shapes his sons. That decision is the first spark. Because on the Mongol steppe, training isn't a sport. It is a system for creating people who can live through cold hunger, war, and long marches, where comfort is a story you tell children. Mongolian children learn to ride horses before they can walk. They learn to shoot while galloping at speed. They learn to sleep in the bitter air and wake up ready to fight. Food is functional: dried meat, sour milk, whatever can be carried and preserved. Weakness is not a moral flaw there. Weakness is a death certificate. Khutulun doesn't merely keep up, she starts to outpace. By the time she is 10, she rides like a rider who has already survived a battle. By 12, she can put grown men on the ground in wrestling. And by the middle of her teenage years, she is training with hardened warriors, men who do not pretend when they lose, because pretending on the steppe gets you killed later. Now picture the scene: a training ring outside a camp, dust in the air, boots worn down from years of use, men watching with folded arms, half amused, half skeptical, until the girl they expected to be a novelty starts dropping experienced fighters as if she's reading their balance like a book. Her brothers watch with pride, and then something else creeps in. Not hatred, not yet, more like recognition. If their sister is truly the strongest among them, what does that do to everything they've been promised? Strength makes a warrior. It doesn't automatically make a legend. What makes a legend is the moment someone with strength forces the world to answer an uncomfortable question. As Khutulun reaches adulthood, stories begin moving faster than caravans. Men trade rumors around fires. There's a princess who wrestles like a demon. There's a daughter of Kaidu who's never been beaten. There's a woman who fights like she's built from iron. And then the suitors arrive, because politics always arrives eventually. Princes, generals, men with money, men with famous fathers, men who treat marriage like a stamp of ownership. They come to Kaidu's court with gifts and confidence, expecting the old arrangement: daughter for alliance, bride for treaty, woman for advantage. Khutulun refuses them, one after another, until refusal becomes a scandal. Her father presses her, not because he wants to control her, but because the entire system he operates inside depends on marriage, the way war depends on arrows. A strategic marriage can prevent a conflict. It can purchase loyalty. It can buy time. Kaidu tells her the truth. Your marriage can secure alliances we need. And Khutulun answers with a proposal that shocks the court into silence. She says she will marry only to a man who can defeat her in wrestling, and every man who challenges her and loses will pay 10 horses. Now, to a modern audience that might sound like a stunt, to a Mongol audience it's something far more serious. Wrestling is sacred. It is a test of strength, skill, and honor. It is how men prove themselves without spilling blood. It is woven into identity. So when a princess turns wrestling into a marriage gate, she is doing something the steppe understands instantly. She is putting herself on the same ground as any man, not as a symbol, as a participant. Some call it arrogance, others call it madness. But Kaidu, after a long moment, does something that tells you he understands what kind of daughter he has. He smiles. Very well, he says. Let them come. The first challenger arrives, quickly, confident, well-fed, proud. He brings the 10 horses like it's a formality. The camp gathers because camps always gather when pride might break. The match doesn't last long. Khutulun moves with the kind of quickness you only see when someone has trained for years with men who didn't go easy on her. Grip, feint, twist. Then the challenger hits the ground so hard the dust jumps. The crowd roars. Khutulun doesn't celebrate like a performer. She stands calm and collects the horses. Then another challenger, then another. Some are technicians, real wrestlers with reputations. Some are mountains of muscle who assume weight is the only math that matters. Some study her previous matches trying to decode her habits, looking for a single opening. None of it works. 10 horses becomes 100. 100 becomes 1,000. And with each win, the meaning deepens. This isn't simply a woman beating men. This is a woman demonstrating publicly, repeatedly, that she will not be traded like property. Every victory is a declaration with dust on its boots. Eventually, a challenger arrives who doesn't bring 10 horses. He brings 100. That kind of wager isn't just confidence, it's a public announcement, I will be the one. He arrives with banners, guards, and the theater of victory because pride is part of the strategy. He wants the camp to feel the outcome before the match begins. People whisper this man has never lost. He's beaten more opponents than most men can count. He's trained in multiple styles. He isn't just strong, he's seasoned. For the first time in years, doubt appears in the crowd like a change in weather. And even Kaidu, battle-hardened politically, ruthless, shows concern. In private, he tells his daughter she doesn't have to do it. There is no shame in refusing. Khutulun's answer reveals something crucial about her mind. If she refuses now, she says everything she has built becomes vulnerable to reinterpretation. Men will claim she only fought safe opponents. They will rewrite her legend into a trick. She will not allow that. She will fight him, and she will win. On the day of the match, the camp empties out. This is no longer entertainment. This is a referendum. The champion enters first and performs the ritual movements, a dance meant to honor strength, tradition, and the identity of the wrestler. He moves like a man who expects applause because applause has followed him his entire life. Then Khutulun steps forward. Silence, not because she is fragile, because she is a symbol now. She wears the traditional wrestling gear, the same practical outfit worn by wrestlers across the steppe. On her, it doesn't look like costume. It looks like uniform. They circle. They test distance. The match begins. The champion lunges with surprising speed for his size and gets his hands where he wants them. He pulls, trying to break her balance with weight and momentum, and the crowd reacts because for a brief moment, it looks like he has done what others could not. But Khutulun doesn't fight the pull. She uses it. She drops her weight, rotates, and turns his force into a mistake. The champion stumbles, not much, just enough. And Khutulun needs only a fraction of a second. She hooks, grips, and executes the kind of leverage that makes the laws of physics look personal. He hits the ground like a felled tree. Dust erupts. The camp doesn't breathe. Then Khutulun rises, steady, composed, and the steppe explodes with sound. The undefeated man lies there, staring at the sky, trying to understand how the world just changed in front of him. Khutulun collects the 100 horses. But she does something next that surprises everyone and adds a new layer to her power. She offers the defeated champion a place in her father's forces. Not pity, not charity. Strategy. A lesser person humiliates an opponent. A serious leader converts him. Because a defeated man can become a resentful enemy or a useful ally who now understands personally who holds real strength. The champion accepts. And Khutulun walks away from the ring with a truth burned into the camp's memory: she is not merely equal to the men around her. She may be superior, but the wrestling ground, as extraordinary as it is only the beginning. Because the next chapter will ask a bigger question than, who is strongest? It will ask who can lead when the empire itself is splitting apart. So here's the question the wrestling ground can't answer when the dust stops being sport and starts being blood. Does a legend still hold? It's one thing to beat men in a ring. It's another to command them when arrows are falling and horses are screaming. On the steppe, reputation can be loud, but war is the only judge that never lies. And war is coming. By the time we reach the mid-1300s of that century's first half, Khutulun, now a proven adult, the Mongol world is no longer a single beast moving with one will. The empire that once obeyed one lineage has fractured into competing khanates, each convinced it carries the true torch. Kublai Khan, ruling from China, claims authority over all Mongol territories. His power is real, his statecraft is sophisticated, and his court is enormous. But to Kaidu Khan, Khutulun's father Kublai represents something dangerous. A ruler softened by settled life, influenced by Chinese administration, drifting away from the old Mongol way. That's the political language. The emotional truth is simpler. Kaidu refuses to kneel, and Kublai will not allow a rival to grow unchecked. When Kaidu gathers forces, he makes a decision that lands like a spear thrown into dry earth. He appoints not a ceremonial rider, not a lucky symbol, a commander with actual authority over thousands of men whose lives will depend on whether she reads the battlefield correctly. Older generals protest. You can hear their argument before they even speak it. Tradition, order, predictability. A woman cannot lead men. The troops won't follow her. Kaidu's response is short and brutal, the way steppe leaders often speak when they're done pretending. Watch them. Khutulun's first true test comes during a clash near the Talus River. Khutulun rides with a contingent of roughly 300 horsemen. Her mission is straightforward in theory. Swing wide, hit the enemy's rear, break their formation, create confusion. But as her riders circle, they spot the problem too late. The enemy has placed a reserve force precisely where she intends to strike. If she follows the original plan, she rides into a trap. If she retreats, she loses momentum and risks letting the larger battle collapse. Here is the hook of this moment. Skill isn't shown when everything goes according to plan. Skill is shown when the plan dies and you still have to win. Khutulun doesn't freeze. She doesn't plead for new orders. She does what the best battlefield minds do. She changes the story the enemy thinks they're reading. She splits her force. 200 riders continue the flanking maneuver and make it loud, kicking up dust, shouting, presenting themselves as the main strike. The enemy reserve moves to intercept them, confident they've stopped the threat. Meanwhile, Khutulun takes the remaining 100 and circles wider, using terrain ridges and folds of land. The kind of natural cover only an experienced rider learns to see at speed. She stays out of sight and moves fast. By the time the enemy realizes what has happened, she is no longer on their side. She is behind them. And that's when she strikes where it hurts most, not at the muscle of the army, but at its brain. Khutulun leads the charge, personally. Not because she needs theatrics, because on the steppe, the leader's willingness to share risk is the fastest way to earn obedience. She screams a Mongol war cry and slams into the rear near the command position. The effect is immediate. Officers go down before they can restore order. Signals break, messengers scatter. The enemy structure collapses into individual men trying to survive. And in the middle of that chaos, she performs the act that becomes her battlefield signature. An image that spreads faster than any official report. She spots an enemy officer, someone high-ranking by armor and banners. He is surrounded by bodyguards. Any sensible commander would keep distance, preserve herself, stay alive for the next decision. Khutulun does not. She rides straight through the guards as if they're paper. Then she leans from the saddle, grips the officer by his armor, and hauls him off his horse with a force that turns disbelief into panic. Imagine the psychological effect on the enemy. Your leader doesn't just fall. He is physically taken by one rider like a trophy. Morale snaps. What might have been a disciplined retreat becomes a rout. Khutulun returns to Kaidu's camp and throws the captive at her father's feet publicly so the troops see it, so the officers see it, so the skeptics cannot reinterpret it later. From that moment forward, the question, will men follow her, dies where it deserves to die. They follow her because she wins. And more importantly, she wins in ways that protect them. Over the next span of years, well over a decade, Khutulun participates in repeated campaigns and clashes. She commands forces ranging from hundreds to tens of thousands, depending on the operation. She studies enemies, adapts tactics, and understands something the romantic versions of Mongol warfare often miss. Steppe war is not only about charging, it's about mobility, deception, timing, and fear. Khutulun becomes proficient in all of it, and her reputation evolves. She is no longer just the princess who beats men. She becomes a commander associated with a specific terror, the sight of a woman warrior closing distance, because if she gets close enough, she can take you alive. That matters. Capturing leaders alive is power. But what makes her exceptional for audiences is not only dominance, it's restraint and responsibility. In one recorded-style episode preserved in later accounts, part of Kaidu's forces are ambushed during a retreat. The rear guard is being shredded by pursuing cavalry. It's the kind of moment where an army can become a stampede, where discipline disappears and survival becomes selfish. Khutulun does not wait for permission. She gathers every rider she can, around 2,000, and countercharges into the pursuing force. Not a reckless suicide run, but a coordinated strike hit, hard wheel hit, again from another direction, disrupt the pursuit, buy the rear guard time to reform. It works. The pursuit breaks, the rear guard survives, the army escapes, and that changes what the soldiers call her. Some say she fights like 10 men, but those who served under her begin using a different name, one built on gratitude. They call her the shield of the people. And here is where the story shifts from battlefield glory into something older. Audiences recognize immediately the most dangerous enemies are not always outside the walls. Khutulun's power grows so large, so obvious, that it begins to threaten the family structure she has been fighting to preserve. By around the late 1300s of that century, Khutulun, now seasoned, proven, feared by enemies, and trusted by her father, she becomes the most capable of Kaidu's children. Not the eldest, not the male heir by custom, the most capable. Kaidu grows older. War takes its toll. He must think about succession. And then the whisper begins, the whisper that turns brothers into rivals. What if Kaidu names Khutulun as the successor? When that possibility leaks into the court, the reaction is immediate and explosive. Her brothers, especially the ones who believe inheritance is their birthright, see theft where Khutulun sees responsibility. Advisors warn Kaidu that naming a woman could fracture alliances. Rival Khans send cautious messages. Would agreements made with a female ruler be honored the same way would the Confederation hold? Would enemies smell weakness? Kaidu's position is a trap times. Choose Khutulun and risk civil war among your own blood. Asterisk. Pass her over and knowingly ignore the most qualified leader because tradition demands it. And Khutulun watches something chilling take shape. Her father's favor is becoming a poison. She feels it in the silences when she enters a gathering, in the way conversations stop and restart with a different tone, in the way pride turns into resentment when men realize merit might matter more than birth order. This is the hook that lands hardest with viewers. She didn't ask for special treatment. She earned everything in the most unforgiving arena available, war. And that is precisely why her existence becomes intolerable to those who rely on the old order. So the story turns inward. Not against Kublai, not against enemy armies. Against the slow, dangerous truth that the person most capable of saving the family might be the person the family cannot accept. And the next question is the one that will define her moral legacy. When power is within your reach and taking it could tear your people apart, what do? A battlefield has enemies you can see. A succession crisis gives you enemies who smile while they sharpen the knife. Khutulun had proven herself in dust and blood. Now she had to survive something far more delicate, a father's trust, a court's fear, and brothers who had begun to treat her victories like an accusation. Because once a family starts asking, why her, the next question is always, how do we stop her? Kaidu Khan is aging. Years of campaigning have carved lines into him that no feast can soften. In his private councils, the problem is no longer just Kublai Khan or shifting alliances. It's the one question no ruler wants to answer too late. Who inherits the fire when I'm gone? By tradition, one of his sons should take the seat. He has many enough princes to satisfy any custom and still leave rivalries behind. But Kaidu has watched those sons at war. He has watched them argue, posture, hesitate, and sometimes break. Then he has watched Khutulun do what the others could not. So Kaidu begins to consider the unthinkable. What if the best heir is not the eldest son, but the daughter who has already been doing the work of a ruler. When whispers of that idea drift beyond the council tent, the court reacts as if someone has struck a drum of panic. Khutulun's brothers do not confront her all at once. They do something more realistic, more human, and more dangerous. They withdraw. They become polite in public and furious in private. They stop including her in small decisions. They stop laughing the way they used to. They make alliances that do not require her approval. And when she enters a room, conversations shorten, as if everyone suddenly remembers they have somewhere else to be. Khutulun understands what many warriors never learn until it's too late. Power does not only attract loyalty. Power attracts fear, and fear creates stories. Stories become camps. Camps become civil war. Kaidu is trapped in a ruler's paradox. If he names Khutulun, he risks splitting his own bloodline and shaking alliances that depend on tradition. Rival Khans will question whether agreements hold. Enemies will smell instability. Even loyal generals will wonder who they truly serve. But if he does not name her, he knowingly passes over the most capable leader, simply because custom says capability should not matter when gender does. In private, Kaidu says the quiet part out loud. Khutulun is worth more than any 10 of her brothers. That statement meant as praise as gasoline on a court already full of sparks. Khutulun does not misunderstand her father's affection. She knows it is genuine. She also knows genuine affection can still destroy you if it becomes political currency in other people's hands. She begins to see it clearly. Her father's favor is turning her into a symbol. And symbols do not live long in a court full of ambitious men. So she makes a choice that surprises the viewer, because it is not the choice of ego, it is the choice of stewardship. One night away from the spectacle, away from the generals and banners, Khutulun approaches her father in private, not as a commander, as his child. She tells him plainly he must choose one of her brothers as heir. Kaidu is stunned. He argues the obvious: none of them have earned what she has earned. None of them have her discipline, her instincts, her ability to make men follow without bribery or cruelty. Why should tradition outweigh competence? Khutulun's answer is the kind that lands hardest with older audiences because it sounds like someone who has seen what family conflict really costs. If you name me, this family will tear itself apart. And when you die, there will be war inside our own walls. Everything we fought for will collapse, not because our enemies were stronger, but because our blood could not stop fighting itself. Kaidu presses her almost accusingly. So you would step aside. You would let lesser men take power simply to avoid conflict. And Khutulun reveals the core of her character, the moral spine that makes the story stick. If stepping aside preserves what we built, then I will step aside. If it keeps our people from burning, then I can live without the throne. But I will not stop serving. That line changes how the audience reads her entire legend. Up to now, she is extraordinary because she wins. In this moment, she becomes extraordinary because she refuses to win at the cost of everyone else. Kaidu cannot accept it immediately. A great leader, for all his strength, can still be a father who does not want to waste his best weapon. He says he will think on it. He hints there may be another way. But history rarely gives you the time you ask for. Months pass and the question remains unresolved, like a storm parked over the camp, waiting for one bad moment to fall. Then Kaidu becomes seriously ill. It is around the early years of the next century. Kaidu is old by steppe standards. War has worn him down. And now the body that carried an empire's defiance begins to fail. When a ruler is dying, everything speeds up. Messengers ride harder. Brothers position supporters. Advisors whisper louder. Old grudges suddenly feel urgent, because soon there will be no father left to hold everyone in one place. This is the moment when most families fracture. This is also the moment when Khutulun does something that proves she never needed a crown to rule. Khutulun gathers all her brothers, every prince, every rival, every wounded ego, and forces them into one shared reality. Our father is dying. We have two options. We can fight each other for power and destroy everything he built. Or we can choose a leader who can hold this khanate together. Then she delivers the move no one expects from the woman feared on battlefields. She proposes a compromise. She proposes they support a brother described in the tradition as wise, diplomatic, and fair. One who can unite the family even if he is not the strongest warrior or the most celebrated general. In your source, he is named Horus. And then Khutulun offers the final guarantee that makes the proposal impossible to ignore. I will serve under him as military commander. I will keep the army strong. I will ensure our enemies do not mistake unity for weakness. This is not surrender, it is statecraft. It is the kind of decision that prevents a civil war before the first sword is drawn. Some brothers are suspicious. Of course they are. Men raised in power do not trust power that declines voluntarily. They assume a trap because they cannot imagine restraint. Others are relieved because deep down many of them know what the family has become, and they are terrified of what it will turn into if nobody stops the slide. In the end, they agree. And when Kaidu dies shortly after Horus becomes Khan, Khutulun keeps her word. She does not seize the throne in grief. She does not pivot into a coup. She becomes what she promised, the shield behind the ruler, the force that keeps the realm stable. And that single choice becomes one of the most emotionally satisfying reversals in the entire story. She gives up the crown she could have taken, and in doing so, she saves her father's legacy. But here's the next twist, and it cuts closer to home than battle ever did. Once her father is gone, the court turns its attention back to the one thing Khutulun has avoided for decades: marriage. And when she finally chooses a husband, she shocks them all again, because she does not choose a prince, a champion, or a powerful general. She chooses peace. After Kaidu died, the steppe didn't suddenly become peaceful. The tents still stood like a sea of felt and timber. Horses still stamped and snorted in the cold air. Men still argued over supply lines, rival khans, and the next season's campaigns. But the center of gravity had shifted, and everyone, every general, every messenger, every ambitious cousin could feel it. Horus was Khan, now chosen not because he was the fiercest, but because he was the safest choice to keep the family from tearing itself apart. And Khutulun, the woman who could have reached for the throne with both hands, stood beside him instead of above him, wearing the same steady expression she wore before stepping into a wrestling ring. If you expect the court to reward that kind of restraint with gratitude, you're thinking like a modern person. In a royal court, when you step away from the crown, they don't call you noble. They call you unfinished. They assume your story is still waiting for someone else to write the ending. And the moment her father's body cooled, the whispers returned. Not about battle plans, not about treaties, not about whether Horus would hold the Khanate together. The whispers were about her. They had been waiting for years, hiding behind forced smiles, polite bows, and nervous respect. Now they came out openly, the way wolves emerge when the strongest hunter is gone. You must marry, they told her. You have no heirs. You are getting older. The wrestling contests are over. They said it like it was a law of nature, as if the grass itself demanded it, as if the sky would split open if a woman remained unclaimed. And here is the hard truth. Khutulun could command riders by the thousand, could break an enemy formation, could seize an officer from horseback with her bare hands, but she could not silence a court that believed a woman's life was incomplete, without a man assigned to it. The pressure wasn't gentle, it wasn't polite. It came wrapped in that familiar Mongol logic: marriage is politics, and politics is survival. Princes and noble families wanted to bind her power to their bloodlines. Advisors wanted to reduce the uncertainty she represented. Even allies, men who had watched her win battles, wanted her placed into a predictable shape, the way a wild horse is broken and saddled, so nobody has to fear what it might do next. For years, Khutulun had refused the great names: princes, generals, wealthy men who arrived with banners and gifts, and the confidence of people who had never been told no. Now with Kaidu gone, the court pushed harder, as if they could finally press her into a corner. And for the first time in a long time, people began to wonder, would the woman who defied everyone for decades finally bend? Here is the hook they didn't see coming. She did choose. But she chose in a way that embarrassed every expectation in that camp. Khutulun did not marry a prince. She did not marry a general. She did not marry a champion wrestler with a parade of servants and 100 horses at his back. After a lifetime of rejecting the most powerful men in Central Asia, she chose someone the chroniclers barely knew how to describe. The records don't even agree on his name. Some later sources suggest one name, others another, and that uncertainty tells you something important. He wasn't selected for politics. He wasn't selected for prestige. He wasn't selected to satisfy the ambitions of a noble family. He was selected for one reason that a court rarely understands and almost never respects: because she trusted him. He was a loyal soldier from her father's ranks, steady, quiet, the kind of man who had watched power up close and did not crave it like a drug, the kind of man who didn't need to turn marriage into a contest of control. And that detail matters more than it seems. The story isn't saying Khutulun chose a weaker man. It's saying she chose a safer one. Safe not in body but in spirit. Safe from ego. Safe from the hunger that makes men try to shrink whatever stands taller than their pride. In a world where marriage was often a trap disguised as tradition, Khutulun chose a door she could walk through without losing herself on the other side. The marriage itself was quiet. No great spectacle. No extravagant ceremony worthy of a princess who had become a legend. And that too was deliberate. Khutulun did not marry to entertain the court. She married because she decided to. And she did not surrender her command. She did not step away from war councils. She did not retreat behind curtains and domestic duties. She kept riding. She kept leading. She remained exactly who she had always been, as if to make the point unmistakable: a husband was not a leash. A ring was not a surrender. Imagine what that meant in Mongol society. A husband was expected to be the visible authority, the public face, the one whose name carried weight. But in Khutulun's camp, everybody knew the truth. Her reputation was the thunder. Her victories were the banner. Her discipline was the law people actually followed. And her husband, by all indications, accepted it. Not as humiliation, but as a life he chose because he understood something the court refused to admit. The only way to live beside a force of nature is to stop trying to control the weather. And for a brief moment, it looked like her story might finally settle. A warrior who saved her family from civil war. A commander who kept serving instead of seizing. A woman who married on her own terms and stayed in the saddle. It should have been the end of the argument. But history rarely allows a woman like Khutulun to rest. Because when certain people can't accept your greatness, they don't always deny it. Sometimes they poison it. The rumors began the way rumors always do, soft, concerned, spoken with a careful tone, as if the speaker hated to say such a thing. Then they sharpened into accusations, and the accusations turned into stories that spread faster than facts ever do. They said she poisoned her father. They said she killed brothers in secret. They said her strength wasn't training, it was witchcraft. And notice what those lies have in common. They do not credit discipline. They do not credit skill. They do not credit character. They insist she must be unnatural. Because for the chroniclers who wrote history like a fence, Khutulun was a problem that needed an explanation. If a woman stands taller than your beliefs, you can either adjust your beliefs or you can try to cut the woman down. But here is what the liars could never fix: the logic. Ask yourself, if Khutulun truly poisoned Kaidu to seize power, why would she step away from the throne? Why would she gather her brothers and push them toward unity instead of letting them fracture into the kind of chaos she could dominate? Why would she support Horus, chosen precisely to prevent bloodshed rather than declare herself ruler? Why continue serving as commander instead of claiming the crown outright? A power-hungry conspirator does not volunteer to become second in command. A murderer does not prevent the civil war that would make her rise easier. The rumors don't match the shape of her life. And that is why the most careful reading of her story, then and now, points to a harsh conclusion. The accusations say more about the men who repeated them than they ever said about Khutulun. So she did what she had always done. She ignored the gossip and stayed focused on what mattered. Under Horus, the Khanate remained strong, and with Khutulun still at the head of its armies, it stayed feared. She led campaigns. She protected retreating troops. She held the line when others broke. The court could whisper all it wanted, but soldiers live in reality, and reality has a way of overruling rumor. When danger came, you wanted Khutulun between you and the enemy. In her final years, the record grows thin, the way it often does when history is written by men who would rather forget. Some traditions suggest she died in battle, as a warrior would. Others suggest she died naturally, surrounded by family. The date is uncertain, the place is lost. Her grave has never been found. Time did what time always does. It erased details even from a woman who moved like thunder. But the broad outline remains, and it is impossible to ignore. She served as a commander for decades. She fought in countless battles. She captured enemies in combat. She built wealth through victories that should have been impossible. She influenced the succession of a powerful Khanate, and she did it while living in a world that insisted women should do none of it. And if you think that is where her story ends, it isn't. Because after her death, something strange happens, something that proves she never needed a throne to conquer the world. Her legend leaves the steppe, it crosses borders, it changes its clothes, it survives in places that don't even remember her name. So the question is this: How does a real Mongol warrior princess become a story told in distant lands centuries later? And why do millions of people repeat her legend without realizing it was once a living woman? That is where we go next. Their story stops belonging to one camp, one family, one khanate, and starts moving like smoke. It slips through cracks. It crosses borders without asking permission. It changes language. It changes clothing. It even changes names. And before you know it, the world is repeating a legend while forgetting the woman who lived it. Khutulun didn't die with a crown on her head. She didn't leave behind a palace full of scribes eager to preserve her memory. She left behind something more dangerous: proof. Proof that a woman could defeat champions, lead armies, outthink court politics, and do it without becoming a villain in her own heart. And that kind of proof makes people uncomfortable, especially the people who control the ink. So here's the next hook. Even while some chroniclers tried to shrink her into rumor, her legend did the opposite. It expanded, and it expanded because a foreigner heard it. Picture the Mongol world in the late medieval era. Vast distances, hard travel, camps scattered across grasslands like islands on an ocean. News spreads the way it always has in those places, by mouth, by songs, by men sitting beside fires, telling the same story with one extra detail each time. Now imagine a traveler from the far edge of Europe hearing that story for the first time. A Venetian, an outsider, a man who doesn't share Mongol assumptions about what women can or cannot do. He hears the name, maybe not perfectly. He hears the details, maybe not neatly. But what he understands is simple. There was a warrior princess who made the proudest men in Central Asia fall into the dirt. That traveler's name is Marco Polo. And whether he witnessed Khutulun directly or collected her story from the people who lived under Mongol rule, he carried the tale back west like contraband. He wrote about a woman who challenged suitors, defeated them in wrestling, and lived like a commander, not a decoration. In his telling, her name shifts, blurred by translation distance and the way a foreign tongue reshapes sounds. Some versions remember her as Igarn, possibly a corrupted echo of one of her names or titles. And that detail matters because it shows you how legends travel. They rarely arrive intact, they arrive recognizable. Now listen closely to what happens next, because this is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. Europe doesn't receive her legend with respect. It receives it with fascination and suspicion. You have to understand the mindset. Many European readers at the time would have treated a warrior princess the way they treated dragons and sea monsters, something exotic, something entertaining, something that proves the traveler went far enough to see strange things. A woman who defeats men in combat, a woman commanding armies. For a lot of readers, that didn't sound like history, it sounded like a campfire exaggeration. But here's the hook. Skepticism doesn't kill a powerful story. It often feeds it. Because when people can't fully believe something, they retell it to test it. They repeat it at tables. They argue over it. They dress it up. They twist it. And slowly the story detaches from the real woman and becomes a myth that can be reshaped to fit whatever the audience wants. And that is exactly what happens to Khutulun. Her tale doesn't remain a Mongol story in European hands. It gets rewritten into a European kind of power fantasy. Not a woman who wins through training and discipline, but a woman who becomes a puzzle, a threat, a spectacle. Over the centuries, the spine of her legend remains the same, an unconquerable woman who refuses to be claimed, but the details get rearranged like furniture in a room after a storm. Then in the 18th century, an Italian playwright named Carlo Gozzi takes the traveling legend and turns it into theater. He writes a dramatic work called Turandot, and in this version, the warrior test becomes a mental test. Suitors don't wrestle her, they face riddles. Fail and they die. It's darker, it's more theatrical. It's built for an audience that wants danger on stage and punishment delivered cleanly like a verdict. But do you see what survived? The core survives. A powerful woman refuses to be traded. Men line up thinking they can conquer her. They fail and they pay a price. That is Khutulun's skeleton still standing even after centuries of costume changes. Now here comes the next turn, the one that makes people sit up, because this is where a legend becomes global. In the early 20th century, composer Giacomo Puccini adapts Gozzi's theatrical work into an opera also titled Turandot, and suddenly the story isn't being told in tents or courts or books that only a few men can read. It's being sung in the grand halls of the world. New York, London, Paris, cities that never saw the steppe, Audiences that have no idea what a Mongol wrestling match looks like. Millions of people hearing the story of an icy, unyielding princess who refuses to submit to any man without realizing that at its root, this wasn't born from pure imagination. It was born from a real woman on a real horizon. And here is the question that should bother you, especially if you've lived long enough to watch history get rewritten in your own lifetime. How does a real person become famous everywhere, while her actual name becomes invisible? That's not an accident. That is how history often behaves when it meets a woman who doesn't fit the rules. But Khutulun's legend doesn't only survive in the West as entertainment. Back on the steppe in Mongolia, she becomes something else. Not a novelty, not a rumor, a symbol. A national hero in the old sense of the word, someone whose story is repeated not to shock but to teach. Traditional wrestling culture keeps her memory alive. Girls hear her name and understand early that strength is not a male inheritance. And in a land where horses and endurance shape identity, her story is remembered as an example of what Mongol women can be when they're allowed to train, fight, and lead. Now we shift again because the modern world introduces a new kind of battlefield academia. For a long time, historians treated Khutulun like a footnote, an interesting side character in her father's biography, a curiosity that could be mentioned and then safely ignored. But modern scholarship does something different. It asks the uncomfortable questions. It looks at the political context. It compares sources. It examines the motives of later chroniclers. And it notices the same thing you noticed when we broke down the rumors. The accusations don't match the behavior. If Khutulun were truly a poisoner, why step away from succession? If she were a secret murderer, why unify her brothers instead of exploiting their division? If she were a witch, why do the details of her success look so much like training, discipline, and tactical intelligence? And once you see that the final hook of her story becomes clear, the most revealing part of Khutulun's legacy is not only what she did, it's what people needed to believe about her to make her existence tolerable. Some men could not accept that a woman could be extraordinary on merit alone, so they invented a darker explanation: poison, magic, betrayal. Not because the evidence demanded it, but because their worldview did. In other words, the scandal isn't what she allegedly did. The scandal is what the world did to her story afterward. And that brings us to the real point, especially for an American audience that has lived through decades of headlines, spin, and public takedowns. History is not only written by the victors, history is written by the comfortable, by the people who want the world to stay predictable, by the people who feel threatened when someone proves the rules were never laws, just habits. So here's the question I want you to sit with as we close this chapter: how many other Khutuluns were erased completely? How many women did something remarkable and then disappeared because the record keepers couldn't handle what they represented? We'll never know the full number, but we know this one. And her story survives because it was too powerful to bury. Next, we finish the arc with the final payoff, what Khutulun's life actually proves when you strip away the opera costumes and the court gossip. Not a modern slogan, not a trendy message. A deeper truth about discipline, identity, and the kind of courage that doesn't ask permission. So stay with me, because the last part isn't just an ending, it's the reason her story still matters now. Khutulun's real legacy isn't just that she beat men in wrestling or led armies. It's what she proved about power. She refused to be traded like a political object. She set her own terms and then had the discipline to win over and over. And when the throne was within reach, she chose something harder than ambition. She protected her people from a family war. That's strength most rulers don't have. Then the court tried to finish her story with marriage. She married only when she decided, and she chose trust over status. No prince, no champion, no trophy husband, just a man who wouldn't try to control her. And when later writers couldn't accept a woman achieving all of that, they did what insecure history often does. They invented poison, witchcraft, and betrayal because admitting skill and character was too uncomfortable. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If someone in your life had the power to take more money, status, control, but chose restraint to prevent damage, would you call that weakness or the rarest kind of strength? And one more. Have you ever seen a person get punished with rumors simply because they couldn't be controlled? History has a habit of doing something predictable. When a woman picks up a weapon and wins it, either turns her into a myth, reduces her to a footnote, or smears her name until the audience stops asking questions. Khutulun isn't the only one. Across the world, there are warrior women whose stories were softened, edited, or buried, not because they failed, but because they didn't fit the version of order later writers wanted to sell. Some are well documented. Some survive through oral tradition. Some sit in that uncomfortable middle ground where the evidence is real, but the recognition never arrived. Think about women like Tomoe Gozen, remembered in Japanese tradition as a fierce samurai-era fighter, or Boudica, the British queen, who led a rebellion so violent that Rome could never fully erase the fear she caused. Or Artemisia of Caria, a naval commander tied to the Persian Wars, praised even by enemies who didn't want to admit she outthought them. Or the Trung sisters in Vietnam, leaders who became symbols of resistance even as later records tried to confine them to legend instead of leadership. And then there are the cases history loves to argue about, the so-called shield maidens' warrior burials, the blurred line between myth and memory. Sometimes that debate is honest scholarship, sometimes it's just another way of saying, I still don't want to believe she was real. That's why we're continuing this series. Not to rewrite history with fantasies, but to pull the overlooked names back into the light, separate the propaganda from the facts, and give credit where it's due. So here's what I want to ask you. Which forgotten woman warrior should we cover next? And why do you think her story was pushed into the shadows in the first place? Leave a comment with a name, a country, or even a rumor you've heard. If it's worth investigating, we'll dig until we find the truth.